Projects, TASH, and Federation for Children with Special Needs. Bill continues to advocate for inclusion through consulting and by presenting at universities and conferences. In 2011, Harvard Education Press published his book, The Blind Advantage: How Going Blind Made Me a Stronger Principal and How Including Children with Disabilities Made the School Better for Everyone. Bill also keeps busy exercising and spending time with family and friends, particularly with his grandchildren. So on behalf of the MPSC, I would like to welcome Dr. Bill Henderson.
For those kind words, and thank you, Karen, for getting me set up. And Melissa, what a very impressive list of accomplishments and wonderful speech. It was wonderful to hear your story and about Aiden and also about Maggie. And I'm going to start out with a couple of stories about kids with Down syndrome too. First happened in September of 1989. Inclusion started that year at the O'Hearn because parents had organized and lobbied tenaciously for that up until that time in Boston. If you have a disability like Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, significant autism, there was no place you could go and be included with your non-disabled peers throughout the school. And I remember starting that year early in September. I was in 2 kindergarten classrooms. I was walked down to one of the classrooms. I could see a little bit then, I could see some faces. And I was in a classroom with 2 teachers and 20 kids, some kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, mixed class of 4 and 5-year-olds. There were 4 kids with disabilities, a kid with Down syndrome, a kid with cerebral palsy, a kid with autism, and a kid with some emotional issues. And there were 16 kids without disabilities, but with a range of issues and abilities. And at the beginning of the school year, as kindergarten teachers do, they were practicing their routines and their transitions. And this particular teacher used the piano. She played some notes, and it was time to switch. So it was time to go from play to independent reading. And she hit the piano, and most of the kids started going where they were to the reading area, picking up a book and sitting on the rug and reading it. One of the teachers was helping a kid in a wheelchair transition to the other area, and the other teacher was dealing with a couple of kids who were having some minor meltdowns, one with special needs, one without. And then there was this boy, Charlie, and he had Down syndrome, and he was sitting in the play area, and pretty much everybody was gone. And he's sitting there by himself, and he's looking around like, what are you guys doing? And there was this little girl, Maria. Maria said, Charlie, it's reading time. He looks like her like, what are you talking about? And then Maria gets up, goes over to Charlie, and kind of pulls him by his shirt sleeve. Come on, Charlie, it's reading. Charlie, being smart, knowing how to deal with dominant women, quickly got up and started maneuvering over to the reading area, to the rug. Maria sits down, she hands Charlie a book. He's standing there with a book. Maria's sitting down and reading. Charlie's standing with a book. So he may as well sit down. He kind of used Maria's shoulder and body as a prop to get down to the ground for balance purposes. And Maria says, read. So Charlie takes the book, opens it up, and flips the pages. Now the book was upside down, but Charlie was having a good time reading. You know, one of the most amazing things we learned at our school with inclusion is how much the children taught each other. You know, it was, yes, you have to have talented staff, involved families, but how much young people do for each other. And I want to tell you that over the years, while I was at the O'Hearn, we probably had about 20 to 25 kids with Down syndrome because we drew from a area that served about 10,000 elementary kids, parents had choice. And a lot of kids with Down syndrome, 33% of the kids in our school with disabilities. And overall, we went from being one of the lower performing schools in the city before we were inclusive, consistently being one of the higher performing schools in the city on national test scores and also on the MCAS, and a very popular school for school choice. And there's no doubt in my mind that having kids with disabilities, and having kids, that's my alarm clock going up, and having kids with Down syndrome helped transform teaching and learning at our school. Students with Down syndrome were an embellishment. They were a gift. In fact, I remember being in the mid-90s at a conference where we were brainstorming about what we could do to reform education in Massachusetts, how we could get better results and be better in our schools. And people went around the room and shared their ideas, and I said, you want to improve education in Massachusetts? What I think you should do is recruit more students with Down syndrome. Recruit students with Down syndrome. That makes it better for everybody. Now, lest you all think I'm totally naive, I'm also going to share some of the challenges that we experience with kids with Down syndrome. The first one was with Charlie. Now we're going to fast forward. He's in the 3rd grade. A little more academic work expected. You know, I look at disabilities as every disability has a spectrum. You know, I know they talk about the autism spectrum, but really, they don't people who are blind, learning disability, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome. It's all a spectrum. And Charlie, I'm going to say, from my experience, was kind of average. You know, he was talking and walking. In the 3rd grade, he was reading some, a little lower than 3rd grade level, doing some math, needs some modifications. And most of the days in the morning, he was doing great work. You know, he was on task, he was getting things done. But after lunchtime, we had a stretch in the 3rd grade, particularly after they went through daylight savings, you know? He just wanted to kind of zone out. I mean, his idea of the afternoon was put your head down on the desk, maybe look at what they did, but he didn't feel like doing much. Now, I will admit, this was before the days of iPads and all of the kinds of things, and we did more pencil and paper work. Perhaps it could have been a little bit more engaging, but the teachers tried. They were modifying the instruction, they made it engaging, but he wasn't doing much of anything. We tried motivating him, we tried giving rewards, we tried keeping him after school, but teachers were frustrated, parents were frustrated, and it didn't look good being in a class for 3rd grade, and what you're doing most of the afternoon is zoning out, a little bit of napping, taking it easy, just hanging back. But we noticed that, you know, people said, well, you gotta find what turns them on, what makes them passionate. And every afternoon around 2:15, the custodian, Joe Branch, great guy, would come around with his car, and he'd go in the room and he'd pick up the trash that was there, and he'd go around to all the rooms and collect it. And every time Joe would go in, you know, Charlie would sit up, hey Joe! You know, how you doing? You know, and that really kind of perked him up. So, you know, this is before, I don't even know if they were talking about positive behavior supports and functional behavior assessment. I don't know what lingo we had. We were problem solving and brainstorming. We said, hey, you know, he gets excited with Joe. So we met with the mother, we talked with the teachers, we involved some therapists. We said, well, why don't we have a system that Charlie, if he does work assignments, we give him checks. You know, he can get 5 or 6 in the morning, but he's got to do some work in the afternoon. And if he gets up to 10 checks, you know, we'll put on his gloves, he gets to walk around the school with Joe, he pushes the cart, Joe's picking up and emptying the trash, and they would go around and Joe late night to sing Happy Trails with him as they went around. And Charlie, who was maybe 5% getting his work done in the afternoon, went to almost all the time, 95%. And that day that he didn't do the work, you know, Joe would come in and say, hi Charlie, you know, sorry you didn't get all those checks today. Hope we can do it tomorrow. He was like crestfallen, but he didn't go around. And that worked. That was a solution for motivating Charlie. And I will say, when we had every year we had a talent show, and the last year Charlie was in our school in 5th grade, and the last act was Joe and Charlie getting up on stage together, singing Happy Trails together. A lot of wet eyes, and you know, Charlie now as an adult is working in the recycling center at City Hall, and Joe is in Happy Trails in New Hampshire as a retired person. So that was one challenge. Another challenge was a first grader named Emma. Emma, again, when I say every kid is different, Emma was quite high functioning as a student with us. In fact, she knew more sight words and everybody's name than a lot of first graders did initially. And she was quite physical, very athletic, mixed in, socially very popular. Charlie was very popular too. Almost all of our kids with Down syndrome were some of the most popular kids in the class. And it's a generalization, I said almost all. And Emma was, great academic work, no problem working, participate, but she had a habit. She liked to pull hair. And sometimes she pulled hair quite hard. You could be in the class, these are like the screams, the discomfort of certain students who in most cases didn't want to tell the teacher because they liked Emma so much, they didn't want her to get in trouble. But they were enabling bad behavior. And we had a conversation, that Emma can't do this. She can't go to lunch, she can't go to camp, and she can't go to camps in the summer. She's not going to get a job. She's pulling people's hair. And so we had to do some consequences. Time out in the room. Time out in the office didn't work because she loved coming to the office. Secretaries, it was like reinforcing bad behavior to come to the office. So we tried some timeouts in school and home. We did some pictures of how you say hi to people, high fives, alternate things, stickers and stars. And it diminished. There were still a couple of kids. She would go after a couple of the weaker kids and girls with longer hair. Maybe it was the kind of bullying that she was doing. And it wasn't acceptable, and we dealt with it. It diminished. But I even had to teach a couple of kids, if Emma comes near you, put your hands up, say, hi, Emma, no hair pulling, and keep your face looking at her. Not an ideal thing to do. One parent was very appreciative. Another parent said, why should my kid have to put her hands up if somebody's coming close to her? So we worked very hard, and we diminished, and I thought it was pretty much gone. I remember at the end of the year, she was going to camp, and, I say to the kids, happy summer, goodbye, see you later. I shook the kids' hands leaving the school, and I thought it was pretty much gone. And Emma had a voice very distinctive, like, and she'd come out, happy summer. I didn't know it was her. She said, hi, Dr. H. I said, oh, Emma, happy summer. Have a great time at camp. She said to me, happy hair pulling. So, the next challenge I want to share with you is Sherry. Sherry was a 5th grade student with Down syndrome. Sherry was fairly low functioning. She could speak, but not a whole lot of words. Please, thank you, names, give me, come. And her reading skills were mostly with pictures and some basic words, but she was an active participant in the class, very popular kid. And if the work were modified, she'd continue to do it. She really liked to eat and was very popular. And at lunchtime, was asking all the kids after she finished her lunch to share some of their lunch with her. And, 5th graders, being kind, they liked her, could share. But she was having an issue with her weight, and it's not healthy to eat parts of 15 other students' lunches too. It's not so we had to have a strategy. And I know some schools do no sharing of any food. We didn't want to go that way. So we had kind of a rule that was facilitated by sharing, that you could do one share, but it was a rule for all the 5th graders. It wasn't just so that you eat your lunch, and then if there's something that somebody else has, because I'm sure today when we have lunch, somebody might share a cookie or this or that. It's not uncommon. It's something we do. That's part of the socialization process. So, we worked on it. You say please, you say thank you, you say give me, and we actually designated kids, and that was cool. You didn't have to share food if you didn't want to, but you had something you wanted to share, and so she would always have one person. And that was going pretty well. One particular day, the lunch staff was absent, and I had a substitute, and I said, and the substitute came in for the schedule, and I said, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? Very eager, and was hoping to get recommended for more permanent teaching staff. I said, listen, in this period you got one task. You go at lunch, I want the kids to have a good time, to talk, we have to be quiet, to be reasonable, and keep an eye on Sherry. She's supposed to be asking one kid, I don't know who it is, find out from the teacher. After she eats her own food, she can share one thing from another kid. Oh, don't you worry, Dr. Rich, I'll take care of that. So, I'm up in my office, and she comes in, and lunch is just finished, and she said, Dr. Rich, I want to report that the lunch experience was wonderful. The kids were terrific. They all behaved. They took, and it was lovely. And Sherry said, please. And she had the one, and she said, thank you. And it was so pleasant. And you can be so proud. But while she's describing this to me, 3 other 5th graders run into the office. And said, Dr. H, come quick. I said, why? I said, Sherry's eating the leftovers of all the other lunches that are out in the courtyard. See, when the kids finish lunch, they go outside, they leave their bags and lunch boxes on the side. And while the teacher was bragging to me about how great it was that Sherry had, and I went outside, and Sherry had just finished 11 other people's lunches. And it was a sunny day, and she was like sprawled out in the middle of the play structure, basking in the sun, with a look of absolute contentment and bliss. We actually had to change or modify for Sherry the recess. We subsequently had her do at least 2 laps in our courtyard before she had lunch with a friend from the class, And if we tried to make her do some of those laps after she was eating, she was quite slow. We found if we did it before lunch, she was able to make that 3-minute walk much more quickly. So why did I share these situations? Because I just want to, there's complexities. When you deal with kids with Down syndrome disabilities, there are going to be increased complexities, and they're all different. And in each of these situations, we had to do some problem solving. And it involved lots of folks: families, staff, lunch staff, custodians, teachers, special ed teachers, therapists. Frankly, this kind of problem solving that we had to do for these kids with Down syndrome, we had to do similar problem solving for kids without disabilities. We had general ed kids who weren't working very hard after lunchtime. We had other kids who were pulling hair or without disabilities, showing inappropriate behaviors that shouldn't be happening. And clearly there were lots of room for improvement in our lunch and recess experiences ongoing. And again, the experience of that problem solving and coming together to figure out, which was necessitated by having kids with disabilities and Down syndrome specifically in these cases, was a catalyst for helping our school improve. And very shortly I'm going to get into having kids with disabilities. This is why our schools improve, because it forced us to collaborate more. It forced us to change how we do teaching and instruction. And most importantly, it forced us to change our culture. You can go ahead and put up the first slide that might say successful inclusion, meaningful participation, successful performance. Is it big? I try and be sensitive to visual learners. I should say, what does he see? Okay. In my, I did not come into this work from a special education professional background. I was a general education teacher, and I had certification, but not in special education. And there are many of you here present, and some other speakers and those who participate, who know far more than I about special education techniques. What I knew was how to recognize terrific talent, like the teacher Karen Becker, who walked me up here when I first met in the summer of 1989, and then to facilitate people from coming together for problem solving and being creative instruction and building that culture, and involving parents and staff in that process, and also community supports. But so in my 20s, I went to an eye doctor, and I knew I had this eye condition, RP, retinitis pigmentosa, spots on the retina. And I had been told in my my teens, that it wasn't going to be a problem until you're in your 60s, which is where I am now. And when you're in your 20s, the 60s seem about as far away as Pluto, so I wasn't worried about that. And after a full day of exams with some new technology, it was electroretinograms, I don't know, whatever, but it wasn't subjective eye test. There were all kinds of electrodes and wires. The doctor called my wife and me into his chambers. He told me I might be losing my vision the next 5 to 15 years. And he asked me what I did for a job. And I said, I was a teacher. He said, you need to get out of education. So I, kind of obviously buried that information. There was a little bit of denial. My vision did get slowly worse, so I was having some problems with reading light print, writing on the chalkboard that was dirty, and while I was escorting my middle school students around the building, I was doing that fine. My eyes were on them, keeping them in good behaviors, but sometimes I was bumping into more things myself. So when you have a kid with disability, first you ask your doctors for your advice, right? I struck out there, Next, I figured I'd try an educator for advice, right? Where do you go? Where do you go for advice if you don't know about the mass Down syndrome college, You go to these professionals. So the next professional I went to was a deputy superintendent. He knew that I had been, fairly involved in middle school. Our school went through desegregation. I was a track coach. I worked with the student council. And I asked him if he had, and I told him I might be going blind. He started to hear that. He didn't know. I was kind of hiding it, didn't tell people. I was embarrassed. And then I said to him, you got any ideas what I might do? He said, I wasn't sure. He said, well, you've been working in Boston 7 years, haven't you? He said, yeah. I said, no problem. I said, wow, no problem. What is it? Please tell me. He said, you qualify